right. Well, welcome to the Uncovered Dish Christian Leadership Podcast.
The podcast that uncovers stories, equips leaders, and changes the world.
And we're your hosts, Gabby Corbett.
And James Lee. And on today's podcast, the first one back in 4 years, we'll be looking into the future. Actually, the future might already be here.
So on November 30th, 2022, OpenAI launched ChatGPT 3.5, completely free to the public. And GPT, for those of you who don't know, stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, meaning that it generates original content after being pre-trained with all of the data on the internet up until the end of 2021, making it one of the most powerful AI tools available. ChatGPT reached 1 million users in 5 days. Just for some context, Netflix took 41 months to do that, Twitter took 2 years, and Facebook 10 months. This one took 5 days. And at the end of January 2023, they've already reached 100 million users.
So in today's episode, ChatGPT, AI tools, what are they exactly? What are the ethical considerations surrounding the integration of these technologies, and how might we use these tools in our ministry context in the church?
So our guest today is Dr. Kate Ott, the Jerry and Mary Joy Stead Professor of Christian Social Ethics at Garrett Theological Evangelical Seminary, and the author of books like Sex, Tech, and Faith Ethics in a Digital Age, and Christian Ethics for a Digital Society. Kate, we're so glad that you're with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So, Kate, I'm sure many of our listeners who are in G&J may know you during your time teaching ethics at Drew from just up until June of last year. You are an expert when it comes to the intersection of things like faith and technology. So how would you describe ChatGPT in the simplest form? Let's say a 5-year-old is asking you, what's ChatGPT? How would you explain it? And also, you're in the world of academia, so how maybe have you seen it affecting the world of church and academia from your experiences?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me this question, so I did what I feel like most people are doing with ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT how it would describe itself if I were a 5-year-old. So this will help us see. This will help us see a little bit of like what it's capable of.
Right.
So this is what ChatGPT says. Okay, let's imagine you're talking to a 5-year-old. ChatGPT is like a really smart helper who can answer any question you ask. It can tell you about animals, help you with your math homework, and even tell you stories. It's like having a big encyclopedia inside a computer that you can talk to. Important piece of it, right? You get to talk to the encyclopedia.
Right.
But keep in mind, it's not always right. So it's important to double check with an adult before using the information it gives to you. So I mean, it's an amazing answer, right? I think people who I kind of run into in daily conversation and they're like, yeah, I mean, this AI thing, it's not really going to change stuff, is it? I think what they have in their heads is like the smart speaker that they're used to interacting with, that literally you have to ask it like 6 times to get the right formulation of what you're asking to get a usable answer.
Right.
That is not true with ChatGPT. It is so much smarter in its language abilities, and that means it's smarter in its interpretive abilities. Now, it's been trained with users, with human users. So they've put in safeguards, things like that last line that says, ChatGPT isn't always correct. Make sure to check with an adult. So I feel like that's a good basic description of ChatGPT. For people who haven't tried it at all, I do want to just give a quick overview. You know, it's a basic website. You go in, you sign up to participate, and it has a blank search box similar to Google or any other search engines that you're using, where you can type in your question. It will then give you a response, as you all have already noted, based on all the information it's collected from the internet. Now, I think when we hear like all the information on the internet, we think it's like, I guess Wikipedia or, Google search, but it includes like any open source article, books, all kinds of things that have been published that are reliable sources. And then it includes all the other stuff from the internet that's probably we wouldn't want an encyclopedia of this sort to have as information, but it's got all of it. I think it's also important to remember, similar to how we think of our smart speakers, it matters how we ask the question or how we give it a prompt. And that's true of human beings, right? If I were to ask you a random question without much context, you're going to interpret it. You're going to give me what you kind of think. What you would do is your context would inform how you would respond to me. And in human interactions, we're aware of that because we're usually looking at the physical form of the context that's responding to us.
Right. That's so good.
When humans use ChatGPT, I do think we default to thinking it's like this objective encyclopedia. It's not. It's shaped by what information it has. It's not unbiased or fully objective. It already has things built into it that are contextual, that are making decisions about how to respond to us. And so that's also an important piece of this. There's a piece of ChatGPT that's also like really specific to certain kinds of knowledge and approaches to language that might not be true for people who are English speakers of other languages or, people who speak other languages than English.
Yeah, I think the first time I used ChatGPT, I was like, oh, let's play around with this. And it was at night and it was time for me to put my kids to bed. And I was like, let me ask it to write a bedtime story. And I asked my kids, what characters do you want in this bedtime story? And there was Scooby-Doo, Godzilla, and a princess saving the world. And they loved it. And now they don't want daddy telling bedtime stories. They want ChatGPT. It's part of our bedtime routine now. Like they come up with different characters. We add some suggestions for the plot, and then they tell us the bedtime story. Now, there's sort of a ominous side too, though, right? Like I remember in December reading in the news, like how school teachers are saying, hey, I don't think you wrote this paper. ChatGPT turns out is really good.
Yeah.
At writing essays. So I don't know. Have you run across this in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's the same reaction, though. Your kids are like, "Man, your story's not as good."
Yeah.
So let's go with the better story. And it's sourcing from all of these other stories and creative writers that you yourself, as a single human, can't source from. Same goes for the papers that students are using to turn in. I've heard a lot of folks, having this conversation, and a lot of the commentary folks have given the example of, look, there was a debate over calculators forever.
Right.
And that people wouldn't know how to do basic math. Well, anyone who's had to get to high school level math, the calculator only helps you so far. And if you don't know how to type in the right thing, you're not going to get the right answers back. Now, the issue I have with the analogy of the calculator, it's not based on a neural network, and it's not doing interpretive work and continuing in a deep learning fashion to grow. So it has its limits, but I do think the analogy helps us a little bit to say what we are often most afraid of with technological developments are how they're going to replace what humans do and how humans do it. And ChatGPT is probably the closest example we have of those things. Like even the best robots and some of the AI built into them it's still very clunky. And it's not like anyone's going to be like, oh, that's definitely replacing humans. But this is maybe definitely replacing how people write papers and how people write sermons. And so I think that should push us to ask the next question, which is, what's the purpose of writing a paper?
Right.
How good, like, I
Right.
mean, you already know from some of the classes you've been in with me, that's not my primary mode of what I want people to produce. I want people to produce creative projects where they've critically mashed the information together and repurposed it in a new use. Now, you could say, okay, well, Dr. Ott, you give that assignment then, and you're supposed to combine like childish theologies with ethical deliberations.
Taking me back to school here.
Story, I know, sorry. The story of the feeding the 5,000 and create a storybook. Well, ChatGPT can do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Really well.
Probably not going to be as creative or accurate. So what if I gave that assignment and then said, okay, but now in class, you need to bring what ChatGPT produced as the story. You need to identify for your co-learners where you feel like it missed things, what you thought it did really well. So this is the piece that in Christian Ethics for a Digital Society, I talk about as digital literacy. We often reduce our general idea of literacy, but definitely digital literacy to like how something works, instead of recognizing that it includes how it changes who we are, how we form relationships, how we think anew and differently about information, how it switches how we do things in the world. So literacy is actually this really complex social and cultural interaction that oftentimes has to do with language, but can also have to do with digital tools. And I really think ChatGPT has opened up the conversation to push us to say, what new forms of literacy are we going to need in order to, if it's really important to us to recognize the difference between something I produced and something ChatGPT produced.
Yeah. So taking an ethical framework or helping us to kind of understand all of those really incredible new ways that you're even pushing my brain to kind of think differently about ChatGPT and AI in general, how do we sort of begin to develop a framework for pastors and ministry leaders to be able to use this well in a way that's going to not completely replace, some of the work that we do and also allow for our own interpretation, right? So like, how do you kind of see us building an ethical framework around this in ministry?
So I'm big on the fact that I think in general, the way Christians have approached ethics is out of a rules-based framework.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe that has something to do with like, it's much easier just to like quote 10 commandments than to be creative about what we need to do in the world. And we, are uncreative in the fact that we just took those from the Jewish tradition as well. But we do also have a couple other guiding principles, like love of neighbor is supposed to be the primary commandment that we're following. But even when you look at something like love of neighbor, it's not a rule. It's not like don't use ChatGPT, or you can use ChatGPT to find out factual information, but don't read directly from it for your sermon. Like those rule-based approaches, I think generally don't work because we are complex moral human beings in community, but we default to them, both in Christian circles generally, but then especially when it comes to technology, right? We're like, it's too complex. Let's just decide, either use it or don't use it, or use it for this, but not for that. And then it changes and our rules are pointless in, the month or year or whatever that it changes. So I really want to push us to think from an adaptive, creative, and relational approach to ethics, which is not to say everyone gets nervous. They're like, oh, that's a slippery slope. It means anything goes. No. I actually think it's more difficult. It means that if we have certain moral values or moral commitments in our community, then we have to pay attention to community and to context as we work out how we're going to live ethically together. So instead of having a bunch of rules, we would have values that guide us. So let's say, the love commandment is a primary value that guides us. Well, how do we put that into context in our communities and ask what that looks like? It's going to look different in different communities because different communities have different needs. So I don't think we can come up with a general rule for like, how can pastors ethically use ChatGPT other than maybe a guiding principle that says they should use it in a way that complements the contextual needs of their community.
When I talk to like clergy and church leaders, a lot of them are still stuck in the conversation of whether to use it or not, whether this is good or if this is evil, or I don't know if they would use that language per se, but like when I bring it up to some of my folks, right, or some friends, they'll be like, "Oh, I don't know about that. That sounds weird. I don't know how I feel about it," and they jump straight to the negative as kind of the do not do, right? So I think a lot of folks are even wrestling in that area.
So let's see what ChatGPT says pastors should do, because I mean, why not ask it if it's smart enough to give us an answer?
Did you ask ChatGPT what pastors should do?
Yeah. So how can ChatGPT help pastors? That was one thing I asked it.
Okay, let's hear it.
So ChatGPT can definitely assist pastors in many ways. Here are a few examples. Sermon preparation. No, remember, it said sermon preparation. It didn't say write your sermon for you. So it's already built in.
It can, but just because it can doesn't mean it should.
Right, exactly. It can write a sermon for you, though, by the way. I mean, anyhow. So it's been adapted through user interaction. It doesn't say it's already got ethical values built in. It doesn't say use it to write your sermon. It says sermon preparation. And there it says you should use ChatGPT for biblical research, provide insights and background information to enhance your sermons. So it also, you got to come up with your own ideas to start with, though perhaps you could put in a text and ask it for ideas. It could help with counseling. And you wonder, how is this AI going to help with counseling? Well, it could provide biblical guidance. I just want to admit that made me a little nervous because I thought, I'm not sure all traditions or all people seeking pastoral care are going to best be helped by biblical reference or guidance. But it can also support individuals seeking pastoral care and counseling to find individuals, but also find additional resources. So it expanded it a little bit there. It can also help, which I think most pastors are interested in, with administrative tasks.
Yes.
It can help with scheduling, email management, and basic research. Those are all good things, right? And those are all things that we already have AI to help with. I mean, if you think your calendar system is not AI, it is.
Right.
If you think the Google search box, when you type in extra commentaries for this passage, that's already AI helping you. This is just doing the interpretation for you. So should you maybe be skeptical or bring a little bit deeper lens of analysis to what it finds for you? Yes. Okay, but then this is the ethics built in again. Please note, well, ChatGPT is trained on a large corpus of text and can provide information and support. It is not a substitute for human interaction and pastoral care. Pastors are unique individuals with the training and gifts necessary to provide the spiritual and emotional support that individuals need. I mean, that's what ChatGPT told me.
Right. Yeah, I love that it always comes with a little caveat at the end, right? A little disclaimer. ChatGPT is pretty good about writing its own disclaimers.
Which is important. I mean,
Sure, fair.
Please don't sit there in a counseling session and type into ChatGPT, what do I do with this situation?
At a certain point, you should know. Yeah.
Right.
I do want to say the Iliff School of Theology, which is in Denver, the seminary there, has an AI institute. Their current director is working on his name is Philip Butler. Philip Butler is creating this AI called Seeker. And it's an application that you can use that you kind of type in. It helps you map your feelings, what's going on for you. And it interacts with language and kind of visual images that are specifically related to Black US culture in a way that might hold the context of the user in a different way. Or, for me, say as a white user, disrupt my context and my assumptions. in a way that something like ChatGPT is probably reinforcing the kind of latent whiteness and newsish reporter speak and language that happens online. So that's like a different example, but it's also to say that, you know, I think human beings are really important in terms of relationality, but that doesn't mean that humans don't have good relationships with technology or AI in a way that can support them both through their mental health and maybe even through spiritual care.
Yeah, when I first encountered ChatGPT and was spending a lot of time, maybe too many hours into the night, just playing around, it felt like I was talking to my white friend. Does that make sense? Like, I felt that. I was like, this does sound, I mean, I understand where sort of the data where it's pulling from, but inevitably if, you know, we live in a country that is majority white, right? I just thought, I started picturing a friend of mine that is white. I'm like, it feels like I'm talking to this friend who's very smart too. So I was like, yeah. So, but it's interesting you bring up these other AI tools that is also disrupting that as well. Are there any other things to consider as we start thinking about, you know, using these tools in our contexts?
Especially for pastors and in ministry, I think it's extremely important to continue to remember or remind ourselves or learn in the first place. I'm not sure where everyone's starting point is, that technology is not just a tool. It shapes us as much as we shape it. So the examples we've given where, you know, like for example, when it gave me that answer on how ChatGPT can help pastors, I also asked it, how would Christians use ChatGPT? Well, it has an inherent bias around scripture as sort of primary authoritative response, which is true for most Christians, but it kind of goes to that first in all of its responses. So I was able to give it feedback and say, you know, this isn't true for all Christians, or, you know, what does biblical guidance actually mean? How do people interpret that? So it's always interactional, but if we don't pay attention to that piece of it, we're letting the tech shape us and not engaging the way that those changes are affecting us, affecting our relationships, affecting our communities. And so if I could encourage pastors or ministry teams to do anything, it would be to not argue over the, you know, inherent goodness or evilness or bias or whatever about any of these forms of technology. It would be to ask a different question. How are people using this? How does it reshape the way we interact with one another? And then you can start to bring the values questions into that and do the ethical work, right? Because I think the other questions are about rules, right? They're about good and bad, yes and no's, that we can't really categorize technology into anymore. But the other way of asking the question is really about moral formation. And if we want to critically engage technologies and, you know, really actually do the work I think pastors are called to, which is formation of communities and changing the world, we have to ask how questions rather than why or what questions.
So can you share some examples of ChatGPT and other AI tools, how they've been used in ministry or nonprofits in the past, and what we can learn from there? Right? So where have they been used before, and how can we sort of begin to creatively imagine what we might use them for in the future?
So I mean, ChatGPT, even in the answers it gave us, I do think people are going to use it for things like, you know, sermon writing. Hopefully they'll give ChatGPT some credit when they do that. You know, when you tell a story in your sermon, when you're like, hey, so-and-so, you know, I was having this conversation and it sparked this theological insight. It's okay to say ChatGPT sparked a theological insight for you. Maybe that helps people in the pews say, oh, okay, I should think about this when I'm using it. Like, this should be a creative act. There are all kinds of other forms of artificial intelligence that we've already named, right? Like the ways most of our computer systems work the ways in which we create, communications formats in our faith communities. I don't think, I wonder where things will expand to after ChatGPT. So, for example, at the Center for Theological Inquiry, that's, I don't know if it's part of or on Princeton Theological School's campus, they are developing, are you a Princeton grad? Okay, great.
We
Glad
get
I've got
excited.
like all the shout outs today. Drew, Garrett,
Yes.
Princeton, Isla. So they have a program where they're trying to work with faith communities to increase the inclusion of folks with various kinds of disabilities.
Yeah.
And they're doing this by using like a separate space within Minecraft. So they've like kind of designed their own space, Minecraft world, where folks from congregations can go in, religious leaders, lay people, families, kids, everybody. So it's a little more inclusive in terms of engagement than I think maybe ChatGPT is. It's a really like one-to-one kind of correspondence.
Right.
Whereas this video game is using AI and machine learning, but you're embodied in kind of a different way, and it's relational and interactive. I don't want us to get so caught in like, this is all about information processing and delivery, because that's what ChatGPT is good at.
Right.
But there are all kinds of other forms of AI, like the mental health app or this online metaverse kind of space that's in Minecraft for folks to use.
Before we started this conversation, Kate, like Gabby and I were just chatting and sharing how I'm totally on the bandwagon. I'm in it. I'm on ChatGPT all the time. I get so frustrated when it goes down, when it gets overloaded. They just came out with a paid version. I'll probably pay for it. It writes half my emails. Well, yeah, it does. I now I can't imagine a world without it now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this conversation has definitely helped me to think a little bit differently about even my own understanding of it, because I think that I have a tendency to jump to not necessarily that it's evil, right? I have lots of AI stuff that I use in general, but what are all of the ways that we could misuse this in a way that's going to do harm, particularly around, spiritual care and preaching and proclamation, and what are we going to lose something in having a resource that we could go to and basically just have it tell us not just here are the Google things that you figured out, but this interpretive end of it. Are we going to lose our muscles to be able to interpret on our own? I am also a child of the Wikipedia years, right, where anybody could go online and change a Wikipedia article. And I have drilled into my head teachers and professors saying, make sure you check Wikipedia because they're not always right. And anybody could go on and change things. And, we did that in high school computer class. We would change Wikipedia articles. So right, I will admit, I was one of those people who did it themselves. Right. So I think I have a little bit more caution in how we use this well, without losing some of the stuff that we as individuals get to do.
I mean, there's one way to look at it to say, okay, if it helps write things like emails, maybe it gives pastors more time in their like way overscheduled lives to actually do those kinds of more interpretive, community-based type of things. I do, just real quick though. So Wikipedia is actually a pretty good source of information.
Right.
As a professor, I just want to dispel this like never use that source myth.
Yeah.
But why? It is because it's community sourced.
Right.
So I'm constantly trying to remind people that there's not this huge divide between something that's digital and something that's not.
Right.
Like the encyclopedias you had, that I had, Encyclopedia Britannica, right? With all the volumes in my classroom.
And Carta.
Who were those written by?
Yeah. Right.
Who were those written by? How did they tell history?
Yeah.
Who did they choose to highlight in those? Right? We still have those same problems online, but there's at least a little bit more access to people disrupting that than there is in those old systems. So we already talked about the fact that ChatGPT sounds, like a white friend giving you smart one, but giving you some responses back. What happens if the majority of proclamation is written by ChatGPT in terms of our sermons? How I've already said there's this bias in what authority it gives scripture. And I didn't even ask it to interpret scripture. So I don't even know yet like what its biases are there.
Right.
But it's going to have those. And so again, I think if we can use it in a way that's pushing us to critically engage in it rather than as a substitute for the work we should be doing, then it probably can have some moral good in our faith communities. If we use it as a substitute for our own critical theological engagement, it's not going to be helpful.
Yeah.
Regardless, it is going to push the question that I think we've had a really hard time in Christian communities figuring out and doing well historically at, which is, what does it mean to be human? And if we already have a bias that being human means you have some sort of preference, goodness, giftedness, it's really important that we continue to get better at either maybe leaving that whole question behind or saying, actually, no, we really seriously need to think through that historically in the ways in which we have severely damaged communities and wiped entire communities out because of Christian colonial movements of who counts as that human ordained by God. And if AI can do most of the things that we used to say are the primary characteristics that set humans apart, what does that do to our answer of that theological question?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Yeah.
That's so good. Kate, do you have any last comments, any burning answers to questions we should have asked and didn't ask?
No, this has been amazing. And even just like prompting me has, I've started to use ChatGPT differently because of this conversation. Yeah. And so I think that for me is the primary ethical takeaway, which is our engagement with digital technology, because of how smart it's getting, should be much more about discernment than information.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Gabs, you think you'll be using ChatGPT now?
I might. Yeah, I'm going to train it to answer my emails. I'm going to be like you. No, but I think you're right. Freeing up some space to do some of the deeper work is really important. So, this conversation has also pushed me to think differently about how we use it well. So,
yeah,
I like it.
All
definitely.
Right. Okay, we have one last question we ask all of our guests. We are the Uncovered Dish podcast. If you could have one dish for the rest of your life, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, what would that one dish be?
Yeah, breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Wow.
For the rest of your life.
I'm a very different things for different times of day person. So this is tough. Wish I had this question ahead of time.
Well, curveball.
I'm going to go, don't hold me to this. It's going to change next week. But this week, I'm going to go with veggie pizza. I feel like I'm vegetarian. Mm-hmm. I feel like that gets all the vegetables.
Yes.
It gets cheese, which I love. And it gets you a good starch. And you can eat it hot, cold. There's multiple. Wait, you guys actually have veggie pizza there?
This is my lunch. I mean, this is yours, Kate, just for you.
Just for you. We know.
The AI printed it out just now.
I knew we had a special connection.
This is literally my lunch. So there you go. Veggie pizza. And that's how we wrap this all up. It's veggie pizza.
Veggie pizza.
That's what brings us all together. Big thank you again to our guest, Dr. Kate Ott. Be sure to check out her latest book, Sex, Tech, and Faith, Ethics in the Digital Age. And you can find her books, more of her writing, more about her on her website, Kate Ott, that's KATEOTT.org, kateott.org. Thank you, Dr. Ott. Oh, I called you Dr. Ott again. I promise not to do that. This is a habit. Kate, thank you so much for coming
James
on.
and Gabrielle,
So glad
it's been so great. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll see you around.
Bye.
Bye.